afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this Asian Bar Association New York CLE on embracing and learning diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace and beyond. This is a topic that I really have spent a lot of time on, and I'm so thrilled that there are so many familiar faces in the room. I went over the Excel spreadsheet about a half an hour ago, and the panel is really excited that we have a lot of our colleagues from other bar associations, friends, people I haven't seen in a long time because of the COVID. I've got some GCs in the room, sponsors of AABANY, which we always thank you for your continued support. Community Asian not-for-profits, law students. I'm just overwhelmed by the response and happy that you're all here to talk about this really important topic. I hope that you will be excited about what we're talking about and engaged. I would like to welcome Sapna Pala, our current president of AABANY, to make a couple of welcome statements because I know this is her year, and I'm so happy to have her with us today.
Thanks so much, Margaret. Thank you all for joining this really important panel. Diversity, inclusion, and equity in our workspace and beyond could not be more important. And it is one of the main objectives of AABANY, as well as my presidency, to support AABANY and our communities to succeed in this critical effort. So thank you, Asker, Donna, Will, Meredith, Sean, and of course, Margaret, for putting together this really important panel. Margaret, I don't know if everyone knows, is actually a past president of AABANY and is also on our board, a very active member of our board, and also our Director of Business Development. So thank you again, Margaret. Thank you, everyone, and I really look forward to the panel.
Thank you so very much, Sapna. A correction, I've never been president because I like to be behind the scenes, but thank you for giving me, giving me that plug. I am the Business Development Director, and I co-chair the Real Estate Committee for the last 13 years. I'd like to make sure that— That's
going to be your next role, Margaret.
Oh, thank you so much. You're gonna have to fight at several other bar associations for that. Well, we'll have to see. I wanted to urge everybody to please join AABANY. It doesn't cost much. It's www.abany.org. We have over 30 committees, and you can see we've been really proactive since COVID and George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, to do the most important things that we have to do in all of our communities and in the legal profession. And you'll see that today from this event. Two of the events coming up, I'm not going to give a recitation of all the real estate events I'm working on, although I do co-chair the real estate committee. Relevant to this topic, I am working on a racism and bias in the Asian community event with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office of New York and New Jersey, and also the Commissioners of Human Rights of New York City. That's going to be a really exciting event. Look out for that the latter part of August and September. And then I'm also working on an exciting event. I have my friend Donna Gordon on this panel today from the United States Tennis Association. I want to explore the world of sports and diversity, inclusion, and racism. I'm very involved in the PGA Tour. It isn't always very friendly to people of color. And I think it's a topic that's very relevant that we should talk about. So those two events will be coming. On our panel today, I'd like to I'm going to read the bios now. There's a lot to read about, but I'm just going to say I'm a real estate attorney for over 30 years. I am senior underwriting counsel at Big Apple Abstract. I'm not going to introduce my boss, Larry Litwack, but he is on the audience with us, and I want to wish him a happy birthday in front of our audience. It's his birthday today, so I'm in the office this morning. I am the development director of AABANY, co-chair of the real estate committee. I'm also newly installed on the board of directors of New York County Lawyers Association, and I chair the Asia Practice Committee there. I am proud to be appointed to the Executive Council of the New York State Network of Bar Leaders, of which Meredith Miller is our president. I represent AABANY there. I am the chairman of the Diversity Inclusion Committee of the Queens County Bar Association. And a new thing that's come up, Sean Bacchus is the CEO of EDIC, that's the Executive Diversity Inclusion Council. I do not get paid for it. I'm a volunteer basis only, but I am the Chief Diversity Counsel and excited to be there to give input into whatever changes we're not-for-profit that we can do on this topic. The last thing I'm going to read about my bio, which I didn't think about until today, and I was admonished by one of the officers at NYCLA that it should be on my resume. I am proud to say that right after law school, I was a law clerk for the Honorable Chief Judge of the Southern District of New York, Constance Baker Motley, who fought civil rights during the 60s during the Meredith trials and worked for Thurgood Marshall. And I was proud to be in her chambers for 2 years and always tell people it guided my entire career and shaped the way that I learned how to give back. Second speaker will be Will Ling. He's a shareholder at Littler. He's a labor and employment attorney, former litigator, assistant corp counsel and senior counsel at Tort and Labor Employment Division, New York City Law Department, former board member of the Asian American Bar Association, New York, sat in my position as the vice president at that time, Entitled Finance and Development. He is the founding chair of AABANY's Labor and Employment Law Committee. He's selected as a diversity fellow of the New York State Bar Association Labor and Employment Law Section in 2013-14. He's named as a New York Metro Supervising Star. He received his BA from Binghamton University and JD from St. John's Law, and has been really busy with labor, employment law, and D&I. I sit on road shows with him, and we're happy to have him today. Next on our roster is Asker Saeed. I'm just running through bios right now. Asker is the principal of Saeed Consulting LLC. He also, and we were so happy when he got this position, is executive director of the South Asian Bar Association North America. We were celebrating his appointment to this position at NAPABA in Austin this year. He previously was diversity and inclusion at Fried Frank, the big firm down on Wall Street, and prior to that was at Day Pitney. Also served in positions as at United Technologies Corp, now known as Raytheon Technologies, and other law firms. Very involved in diversity inclusion, won the Edwin Archer Randolph Diversity Award from the Lawyers Collaborative for Diversity in 2015. Originally a Canadian, now I guess he's here with us, and we welcome him today. Next on the panel is Donna Dozier Gordon, my friend from the USTA, who's become a very dear friend of mine. We love talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is from the United States Tennis Association. They are very busy now working on the US Open, which we will all support, but not in person. We will be watching it via technology. Prior to her position, she was with Darden Restaurants, where she held several positions advancing diversity amongst the company, amongst leadership and management. She also worked in diversity management, public and community relations for the hotel division of Sending Corporation, now Wyndham Worldwide, Burson Marstelet, the Rolling Company, and the New York City Office of the Mayor. Earned her bachelor's degree from Cornell, MPA from Wagner School at NYU, and an MBA from Crumer Business School at Rollins College. And we are very happy to have Donna on the panel today. Meredith Miller is with us, and as I said, I'm proud to be a part of her presidency at the Network of Bar Leaders, where she has now been re-elected in her second year. She is the former president as well of the LGBT Bar and Foundation of Greater New York, also known as LEGAL. She is a business and employment attorney and legal educator. She's a professor of law at the Toro College, Jacob D. Butzford Law Center, and in addition, founder and principal of the Miller Law PLLC. And last but not least, on our panel today is Sean Bacchus, who I know many years from HSBC. He spent over 23 years in the banking industry at JP Morgan Chase and HSBC, where he was in business banking, but also advanced diversity and inclusion. Not a common thing back then, but did his best. And in 2019, took the bold move to decide to start EDICT. That's Executive Diversity Inclusion Council, and called me a couple of months ago, and I hadn't seen him in 2 years. I gave him tickets to go to a golf tournament, and he told me what he was doing, and I went on the website, and I was really excited. And of course, the way Margaret is, I looked at the board of directors and said, but where's the Asian person? And at that point, that's why he was calling me, invited me to be on the board, and I'm absolutely honored to be on the board with him. He also is very involved with his children. He lives in Brooklyn, which we're all proud of, and he is on the board of trustees for the Grace Children's Foundation. So those are our esteemed panelists for today. I know I'm rambling through, but I want to get to the heart of everything. Let me read, for those attorneys on the phone, I will be reading 2 codes today. You will be getting 1 credit in diversity, which is required now for our licenses in New York State, and half a credit in ethics. So let me read the recital. The Asian American Bar Association New York is certified by New York State Continuing Legal Education Board as an accredited provider. This program has been approved in accordance with the requirements of the CLE board for a maximum of 1.5 credit hours, in which half credit, 0.5 credit will be applied towards ethics and professional. 1 credit will be applied towards the diversity inclusion requirement. The program is suitable for both transitional and non-transitional New York attorneys. You must have pre-registered and confirmed for this program to receive CLE credit. The first page of the written materials that were emailed to you is an attorney affirmation, which you must complete and return to the CLE at AABANY.org. If anybody did not register and I got you in, make sure in the chat room you put your name and email address so we can contact you so you can get your CLE certificate. Everybody else, I'm going to be reading you codes. You should have printed off the attorney affirmation sheet off your Zoom instruction email. And you'll put 2 codes down, which I'm going to read to you. I'll put in the chat room and return it to cle@aabany.org. All right, so I will be announcing those codes. There's also an evaluation form, which we appreciate you fill it out. We do read them. And a plethora of written materials. I can't, we can't hand them out in person. All of us spent a lot of time and research on very relevant, it's either treatises on DEI or really interesting articles that you can read about this particular topic. So please go into it, and if you have any questions after, you can contact me. This program is being recorded for archival purposes. Your continued attendance in this program constitutes your consent to transmit, record, and use your voice and image for this purpose. I just wanted to briefly, because of what's happened this week, just recognize and pray and remember John Lewis. Meredith and I, on behalf of the Network of Bar Leaders, were at a federal bar event at the Southern District back in September, where we had the pleasure of meeting John Lewis, and he was receiving the 2019 Presidential Rule of Law Award from the Federal Bar Association. And what a wonderful man. I just wanted to just recite how we should remember him. I read an article from the Brookings Institute yesterday. There's 5 things that John Lewis taught us, and I know he's in heaven watching over us right now. And that is to get in good trouble, okay? Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America is what John Lewis said in Selma on March 1st, 2020, walking over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Always remember 5 things. Vote always. You're never too young to make a difference. And that is my treatise because I mentor a lot of young people. They are our future and our legacy. Speak up, speak out, and get in the way. Taught the importance of speaking up and speaking out. And all of us, and Donna will talk about being an ally. All of us is following up on that, how we have to do that. Become a racial equity broker. Get involved, okay? Make change. We're lawyers. We can institute change. We can talk about it, all right? And never give up. Persistence is very important. Never give up. I'm a child of the 60s, and I thought I would not have to do this anymore, and was still marching on. And happily, we could do all this together. And on that note, let's start our diversity and inclusion CLE. I'd like to call on Ling, and Ling is going to talk about the challenges of diversity, equity, inclusion facing large law firms today. Will, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. And thank you, Margaret, for organizing and putting together this great panel. So since this is a CLE and this was co-sponsored by several bar associations, I was asked to kind of kick things off by speaking about diversity and inclusion and equity in large law firms, particularly the challenges. And during this program, we're going to spend time on not only, what the challenges are, but how do we move forward and how do we effectuate the change that we need. And while I'm going to highlight a few issues that are common to law firms, many of us maybe worked in a law firm or currently work in a law firm, whatever the size may be, I would recommend that you take a look at the PowerPoint presentation that I prepared for the group. It has a good summary of sort of the major points that I'm talking about. And as some of you may know, we've been doing some D&I CLEs during the last 2 years, and this is a really good summary for you to really take back and sort of look at the issues for a further conversation. So I guess I would first start off by saying that in terms of large law firms, I've only worked at one during my career. I'm at Littler. We have about approximately 1,500 attorneys and international offices and sort of national offices here in the States. And while I certainly can't talk about any other firms or any, I do believe that sort of some of the individual experiences that I've sort of encountered and, that friends have encountered are probably very similar to, the experiences that, many attorneys have. And again, the experiences are really of diverse attorneys and non-diverse attorneys. I would also note, as Margaret mentioned, I did work for a very large government organization, the New York City Corporation Council, which has over 700 attorneys. And what I would say is, I think large organizations have, whether it be, the private sector or the public sector, have some of the same overlapping issues. I was fortunate enough to serve on the diversity committee of the law department about 9 years ago. And, I do believe, that there are a lot of same issues that we were trying to address back then that we're sort of maybe at the forefront right now. So it's interesting to see, some of the same issues that sort of persist, and what are we able to do now because of this? In terms of my, time at Littler, I've been here for the, past 7 years, made partner 2 years ago. I'm an equity partner now. And it's, in my experience, is certainly, I've been very fortunate because it's a terrific firm for so many reasons, and some may be more obvious than others. So let me start with the obvious. We are management side labor employment attorneys, right? So we represent, companies both large and small in employment discrimination matters. So, and we also train companies on diversity and inclusion matters. So we're very particularly cognizant of workplace diversity, equality, and fairness issues. So our attorneys need to be both understand the issues and also be as diverse as our clients and their employees and customers. So the less obvious, distinction is really, at Littler, we really have management buy-in, and we have certainly our numbers are important in the categories that matter, and that would be sort of diverse equity partners. I could tell you that more than a third of our partners are female. And so I think, one of the challenges, and certainly the first challenge that I'll be talking about, is sort of buy-in and sort of company culture. And if you've been to some of the other diversity and inclusion trainings that I've done, you'll always hear me say that, because I really do believe it's so important. So let's talk about the challenges, right? And again, number one, law firms need to have support from management and its leadership. And I think this drives everything, because management provides an organization with resources and time. And that really drives awareness, acceptance, commitment, and a common desire to reach goals. And in terms of what does that entail, I would say that it really entails you needing the support of non-diverse leaders. And traditionally, this might be one subset of people, but we all need to be in this together, because it cannot just be one segment of the law firm that's driving and trying to effectuate change. You really need buy-in from top down and across the entire organization. I think it's well known in many studies that historically there's been an underrepresentation of women and attorneys of color at all levels of large law firms, particularly leadership and management roles. And it's also sort of well established that, the law is the least diverse of professional occupations. And that really, cuts across industries and also cuts across the types of law firms and lawyer positions that you hold. And that could mean whether you're a large law firm, small law firm, in-house, government, even at the judiciary. And the question is, what can we do to do change or make change, and why now, right? And you'll hear different reasons. And some of the, things that you might hear sort of, there's a business case for diversity, and then there's studies, and that's all fine, and I fully support that. But I think the other underlying thing that we really need to talk about is sort of, it's the right thing to do, right? And it's the right thing for the organization. And, by that living, sort of that sentiment, I think that would really sort of drive the rest of the discussion about how organizations do things. You've heard sort of, studies about that, how certain firms, don't have any Black partners, and it's 2020. And what we'll talk about during this program is, again, some of the challenges which I've already addressed, and some of the ways that we can move going forward. The sort of the next challenge in terms of large law firms that I wanted to just briefly address is really, why is it so hard to make change at large law firms? And what I would say is, large law firms are very traditional. And what you'll hear from, sort of firms are, how do we sort of move forward, right? And I could sort of go through some list of, you know, traditional things and sort of modern thinking in terms of how to create change. So for example, you know, traditionally, you know, in terms of recruitment, you're thinking about, oh, well, compensation will drive, you know, in terms of recruitment of young attorneys. But now we know these days that it's really growth, the type of work, flexibility, feedback. In the past, you would have sort of folks stay at the same firm for their entire careers. Today, we see more movement. We see more lateral movement. We see younger attorneys wanting to make it to that next step quicker. The other, you know, sort of challenges of a large law firm was, you know, historically it's sort of FaceTime, but now with COVID-19, it's sort of we're working remotely. So these are just, again, some of the challenges of a traditional law firm of how to sort of break that mold. And just a couple of more thoughts. I see the flag. Just sort of, you know, we need more diverse leaders. We need more diverse thoughts. And you cannot continue to sort of blame recruitment about, you know, why we're not recruiting, you know, what issues we have with recruitment. And the issue, what I would say is, it's not recruitment that we're having problems with. It's really sort of being able to retain our talents, because we know diverse associates are leaving at a faster clip than other people. So those are some of the issues that we're sort of trying to address. And why are we having these issues? And it's sort of what you'll see in the PowerPoint is sort of the implicit biases and sort of the micro inequities that are really driving maybe turnover and not allowing people to sort of stay on. So I think what I would like to do now is and sort of invite the group to really just talk about ways we can address this, and maybe share some experiences of you know, that with what we've seen and what things that might work and might not work.
I'm gonna just be brief on mine. I've always been in-house counsel because prior to becoming a title in the title insurance industry, I was on my own private practice. It's been difficult because every legal department that I sat in with GCs, I'm the only woman actually, and I'm the only Asian, and I'm like the worker bee. I work really long hours, and I didn't think that the boss really saw that, or that when I resigned, the general counsel would realize, you're so quiet, Margaret, and you work really hard, so why are you leaving? And it's kind of clueless that they didn't get that. And you hear that from other people now, that they don't promote the Asian attorney because they feel we're just the worker bees. And we got to get past that right now. And I've told my bosses that I resigned to, other Asian thing is that we don't move on because our parents will yell at us unless we move on to something better, all right? That we're kind of quiet thunder, you know, understand the culture. And that's what these law firms have to understand. All the multicultures of the different facets of the population of the attorneys of color. We're quiet, but we're not clueless. We're absorbing and we're listening, and we're breaking it down. And you know, if we have something to say, it's usually pretty important because we're holding back. I remember going to school, usually other students, I was the only Asian student, are always raising their hands. My parents always said, don't raise your hand unless it's important. Don't keep raising your hand all the time because that's kind of futile. And all my whole life, I thought I would get past that, and here we're still talking about it. So some of that has to come change. It has to come from above, but you see it at the Asian bar. A lot of the attorneys are leaving white shoe law firms, and they're either going into their own law firms, or they're going in-house, or they're going to work for the government. So something's wrong in the system that we need to work it out. Anybody else? Nobody else has anything to say?
I guess I would just add, as someone who comes to the table with an LGBT perspective, that diversity has always very personally meant to me authenticity. And, you know, Will mentioned, you know, having the best workplace, getting the best, you know, you can from your employees. And certainly, if they're not worrying about what they can say about their lives and how much of themselves they can bring to the table, you're going to get the best work out of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I guess, and I'll probably talk more about this in my section, but I will say, having worked now in, you know, 4 law firms, and I've been in the legal profession for 20 years, most of it in the law firm environment, law firms are still kind of hung up on this notion that we're all good people, we all want to do the right thing. And so if we just go around and convince good people to do the right thing, then we'll accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the truth of the matter is, number one, you know, as history has shown us, you can't always trust good people to do the right thing, because they don't always do the right thing, not because they're not good people, but because they have lots of other stuff that's going on in their lives. But I think more important, and I will definitely talk about this, you know, law firms are not diverse because they're designed to not be diverse, because everything about a law firm is designed to maintain the status quo. I think Will referred to it as kind of, you know, traditional or conservative, which in my mind are just code words for, we like the way it is right now. We don't want to change it. And so let's just do everything in such a way that we maintain everything the way it is and only make changes if it's absolutely necessary. And I think that's the challenge for law firms. But, you know, I'll definitely
So I think that's the perfect lead-in for your portion of the conversation. So what do we have to do? You've been at the large law firms. Is it like a losing battle? Tell us about what you've done and what you think, because it's got to be changed, or everyone's just going to go into private practice or go work at GC at this point.
So let me just say, thank you, Margaret. And let me just say right off the bat, thank you to AABANY for inviting me for this panel. I've been, I don't know how long I've been a dues paying member of AABANY, but I've certainly attended enough of your events to feel like I'm a part of the group. So my section is, you know, loosely titled Things That Work in the Large Law Firm Environment. And I think what I should have maybe massaged that title a little bit and said more things to think about that might also work when advancing diversity and inclusion in the large law firms, but not necessarily just for large law firms. And so it's really, I want to talk about 5 things to think about. I'm not going to give out, you know, free advice because I'm a consultant. It's not good for business to be handing out free advice, but happy to talk to anybody afterwards if they want to explore any of these things in more detail. I'm very easily accessible on LinkedIn and, you know, other places like that. So let me just start with, 5 things, literally 5 things. Number one, when you're thinking about advancing a diversity and inclusion initiative, I think where you have to start is thinking about your reasoning for doing it. Right. And here's something where I will kind of disagree with what Will said earlier. Although I do agree that doing diversity and inclusion because it's the right thing to do at some level has to be a part of it. I counsel my law firm clients to not focus so heavily on that aspect of it. And I'll tell you why, because if you put it's the right thing to do in the hiring process, for example.
I see people going in.
Oh, is that okay? If you put the concept of doing the right thing in the lateral hiring process, I think what ends up happening is you end up interviewing people, you end up having to make a decision, and someone's going to say, you know what? Let's hire the person of color because it's the right thing to do, or let's hire the woman because it's the right thing to do. And that sounds great, but now you've just put someone into a work environment where everybody is saying, or maybe not saying, but they're thinking, you know what, we should have hired the white guy, but because it's the right thing to do, they hired you. And now you've just set that person up for a very difficult path in a law firm environment. So I tend to shy away from that. The business case for diversity, unequivocally, absolutely, it is 100% spot on. But I also shy away from that, and more from a practical perspective, which is in a law firm environment, how would you ever prove that? You know, so you hired me this year and all of a sudden your revenues went up by $1 million. And so now someone's going to say, well, that's what we get for hiring Asker. So let's give him a cut of that. That's not going to happen. I mean, we all know that's not going to happen. So in theory, the business case seems to work, but it's a very difficult thing to prove. So what I usually tell people is, let's instead focus on a commitment to being the best, right? And how, as a law firm or as a corporate entity, how do you be the best, or at least better than your competitors? I think is you have to have the best people working for your organization. Not the best white men, not the best straight white men, not the best white people, the best people. And unless you believe that women and people of color and members of the LGBTQ community don't have what it takes to be at your organization or to lead your organization, then if your partnership, which most large law firm partnerships are 95% white and 80% white men, you can't tell me that's the best group of people that you could put together. right? Because if best comes in all genders and all races and all sexual orientations, you should be way more diverse than that. So in my mind, the motivation should really be about figuring out how to make sure that we're hiring, developing, and retaining the best people, not just the best straight white men, which is what law firms have been doing a really great job of. Number two, and I touched on this already, is, you know, instead of focusing on rah-rah and encouraging people to do the right thing and cheering people on and convincing them that diversity and inclusion is a good thing, take a step back and take a look at your systems, take a look at your procedures, take a look at your operational customs, particularly in the areas of lateral hiring, work distribution, promotions, you know, deciding who gets promoted, who gets the partnership, who gets to equity. And what you're going to find is most of those systems, procedures, and operational customs are designed to maintain the status quo. I'll give you a very simple example. Again, I'll go back to lateral hiring, right? If you're a law firm, you've got a Stamford, let's say Stamford, Connecticut, just down the road from me, office. You're looking for a fourth-year real estate associate. Okay, great. We need someone, here's the criteria, right? We'll come up with 10 criteria. They need to have gone to this law school, gotten these grades, have this experience, be coming from this quality of law firm. We'll come up with the 10 criteria. But then we'll immediately decide that we can't possibly find someone with all 10. So as long as we find someone with 7 out of the 10, we're good to go, right? But then we're also really busy. So ultimately, we're just going to find the first person that we can find with 7 out of 10 criteria. How are we going to find people? Well, that's an easy one. We've got 5 partners in Stamford, Connecticut, who practice real estate. Just have them go out and find someone that they've worked with in the past from another law firm, right? And on the surface, that all sounds great. But when you peel that onion back one layer, you've effectively just asked 5 60-year-old white men to go out and find the first person they can find who's about 30 years old, right? About the age of their son, who meets 7 of these 10 criteria. And they're going to go out and they're going to more often than not bring someone back who looks just like them or who reminds them of them when they were 30 years old. And then when I put my hand up and say, what about diversity and inclusion? They're either going to say, number one, oh, so you don't think the person that we want to hire is qualified for this position? Which of course is an impossible question to answer. Or number two, well, let's just, you know, worry about that for the next one. For this one, we've got someone that's hired them, we'll worry about it for the next one. So instead of putting yourself into those situations, you know, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but we all know about the Rooney rules. We all know about the Mansfield rules. These are all systems that are designed to ensure that when we go out there looking for people, that the slate of people that we're putting into consideration is adequately diverse. You choose the best person for the job, always. You choose the best person for the job. But if you're only interviewing 5 white guys, you're not choosing the best person, you're choosing the best white guy. And you're always going to get a white guy in the end if you do that. Number 3 thing, I think that's super, super important, and this is specifically for law firms, have someone in charge of your diversity and inclusion initiative and pay them to be in charge. Hold them accountable for being in charge. You can go grab a partner and make them your chief diversity officer, but if you expect them to bill 2,000 hours and bring in $1 million worth of revenue, that's what you're paying them for. So they're going to do the D&I work because they care, but they're just going to do it in their spare time. And second thing to that is, because that's the model that most firms that don't have a professional use, is that you're also going to end up choosing the people who the odds are most against in succeeding at the law firm and ask them to be your chief diversity officer. Because chances are you're not going to find a partner and chief diversity officer who's a straight white man, right? It's going to be a person of color. It's going to be a woman. It's going to be someone from the LGBTQ community, or truthfully, it's going to be someone who fits all 3 of those. And you're going to put them in charge and they've already got all the odds stacked against them. And then you're going to add this really major important issue on top of it. So hire someone and pay them and hold them accountable for making those changes, just like you would do with a financial officer, with a human resources officer, with a business development officer, whatever it happens to be. Number 4, have a budget for your diversity and inclusion initiative. Just saying to someone, go to it and come back to me every time you want to do something, that's a ridiculous system to use. It's complicated. It doesn't allow for anybody to have a vision and to be able to execute that vision through resources. The truth of the matter is diversity and inclusion, it costs money. There's events you have to, you want to support AABANY as a law firm, you got to support AABANY, but AABANY doesn't let you support them for free. You have to pay and you have to buy tickets and you have to sponsor and whatnot. And having money set aside to do that makes the whole initiative that much easier to move forward. And then the last point And there's a bit of overlap in this point with the rest of the comments, but when you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve, and as much as I'm a social justice advocate, I'm a social justice warrior as anybody, I believe in equity, I believe in, equality, all the acronyms, I believe in them. But as a law firm, or a corporation, you're not a human rights organization. So you're a for-profit business entity. And so there always has to be some element of providing shareholder value. Maybe it's shareholder, maybe it's partner, whatever it happens to be. And I think there's always going to be room for social justice in your diversity initiative, for pro bono services in your diversity initiative. But what you really have to focus on, and I really think, and I'm interested to hear what Donna has to say, because I think this is a big part of the Black Lives Matter movement, is creating opportunities for people. Nobody's looking for handouts right now. Everyone is just looking for equal opportunity to prove that they're capable, that they can achieve, that they can do good work, and that they can advance in the organization. So really structure your initiative, structure your efforts, structure your systems and your procedures around creating opportunities so that the best people at your organization are able to succeed.
Let me just ask her that. It was wonderful. I couldn't have said it better in 5 points. I can't agree more with you. And I was talking to you previously in the whole panel, how every lawyer now who's burnt out in their field wants to run and be a diversity officer at a law firm. It involves a lot more than the color of your face. And I have been in-house counsel, but they always make the HR director the chief diversity officer, and that person doesn't really get it. But they're trying to, big corporate companies trying to save money, and it's very frustrating sometimes. So if the firm does that and instills that, I think that's going to be a success story. I have to say, I think Feed Frank probably lost a good person, but you're now in Saba because you really understand it. Does the panel have anything else to add to this, Will? Anything?
Yes, I actually wanted to respond to Asker's response to my
I knew that.
You can't let that get away. Okay, because the reason why I say this was, look, I said doing the right thing, and that's really for driving the other issues. I'm not talking about hiring a lateral partner, right? Because I'll tell you this much, they didn't make me an equity partner because they were doing the right thing. No, it's not that. It's about money, right? And I'm aware of that. But when I'm saying doing the right thing is you're almost reinforcing the stereotype by saying doing the right thing that means a person of color is not as qualified as someone else. So in that scenario that you use about hiring, setting someone up to fail, why would you think that? No, that person is qualified. So all things being equal, we have diverse attorneys, whether it be female or racially diverse attorneys, who are equally as good. And the point I'm trying to make is, all things being equal, we know we have damn good attorneys. They should be the one who's selected for a leadership and management position. And by the companies understanding that, they will do that. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And look, because I've seen the studies about the business reasons for doing something. And it could be argued both ways. So I didn't want to get there. So that's why, in my view, I wanted to sort of stress the underlying, and maybe it's just naive of me, the optimism of people hopefully doing the right thing. And because if that organization doesn't recognize your efforts or your talents, then you need to move on to an organization that does. But that's really what I was trying to emphasize. But that was my response.
No problem. I want everybody to have equal airtime. I see the non-attorneys are being kind of quiet right now. Anybody else have anything else to say on this topic? Asker did a great job on his 5 points. Okay, on that note, we're going to bring Meredith in now to teach us a little bit about attorney misconduct and ethics of what we need to do as licensed attorneys. And I promise that I've saved the non-attorneys for the end to really rev us up on this topic. I didn't mean to put all the attorneys in the beginning, but it's kind of laying the foundation for the rest of what we have to do. Meredith, welcome. Will, thank you for your point well taken.
Thank you, Margaret. And if I could just segue off of some of what Asker said, and some of what I'm seeing in the comments, is that we need to speak up. I was a few years ago asked to speak on a panel for the Bar Association on business law. It was actually an all-day event. And when I got the agenda, there were 14 speakers, and I was the only woman, and there was no person of color. And I spoke up, and I said, "Are you mean to tell me there are no other women in the entire state of New York or people of color qualified to speak about business law. And, you know, the way these things, as Asker said, you know, the way the panel gets put together is, who do I know? And in that connection, I want to thank Margaret for putting together a panel that reflects those goals of diversity that we're talking about. All too often, you know, we go to these panels and they don't reflect any effort or really acknowledgement of that goal. And also just want to acknowledge the moment we're in. You know, it was just a little over 2 weeks after George Floyd was murdered. There were people in the streets calling for change, and the Black Lives Matter movement was really gaining traction and getting a lot of attention. And the United States Supreme Court on June 15th interpreted Title VII to protect LGBT community against discrimination in employment. And it is not lost on me or anyone, I think, in the LGBTQ community that that was a victory interpreting the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That victory was built on the civil rights movement. And there were questions in that case as a matter of interpretation, but one thing was certain, was the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was intended to advance or at least protect against discrimination for the lives of the Black community. So I just want to acknowledge the moment that we're called to. And I've been tasked with doing something that might seem a little less exciting than that, which is connect all of this to ethics. What it reminds me of is this: 2016, the ABA for the first time adopted a model rule of professional conduct that prohibits discrimination in the practice of law. It's Rule 8.4G, and it, in sum and substance, says that a lawyer who harasses or discriminates on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, race, you know the list, in relation to the practice of law, has committed professional misconduct. And at the time, I'll just mention, New York did have a version of this and still does. It's not exactly the same as the model rule. You have both of them in materials. The nuance of it isn't worth getting into now. I don't have the time, nor do I think it's important to the main point, which is at the time in 2016, when this was proposed as an amendment to the model rules, it was described as a sweeping change, and it was also, it had very vocal opponents. And you know, mainly they were on First Amendment grounds. There were other people saying, we don't need this. Much of it was also about religious freedom, the ability to discriminate, I guess, in the practice of law, if that's your religion. And nationally, Rule 8.4G has gained very little traction. I think Vermont is the only state to have adopted it. Now, sure, there are some states that have some version of, or something like this to some degree that existed or they enacted, but it wasn't Rule 8.4G. And at the time, there were panels about whether states should adopt it, whether the ABA should adopt it. And it's a time that seems comparatively quaint, which is unbelievable. And I was speaking in favor of this change. And at the time, it was because I said the rules should reflect who we aspire to be as a profession. And I could describe it as aspirational because, by the way, very few attorneys, you know, get charged with these types of misconduct violations. They're only added as add-ons when they've done a lot of other things like stealing clients' money. Oh, we'll also add a discrimination claim. And so now, though, what this moment, I think, and this is where I'll connect it to the moment, and then I probably over time, is that the place that the rules or the proposed rules address discrimination is in the misconduct section, and it's written in the negative. And what I've learned from this moment is it's not about not discriminating, it's about being anti-discrimination. It's not enough to be not a racist, you have to be an anti-racist. And so what I would say in that is, I'm not saying we should change the model rules, right? But what I am saying is that I think the things we're talking about fall more in the preamble. And it gets me back to this idea that we need to be aspirational about who we are as a profession. And, you know, the preamble, the first thing the model rules say is we have a special responsibility as lawyers for the quality of justice. And I think everything we're talking about in this conversation relates to that point.
This is interesting, Meredith, because Will and I were on a CELI, I think it was about a year ago in Long Island, the Nassau County Bar, and Will remembers this moment. We had 60 lawyers at a bank branch with the big Asian bar banner in yellow, 3 attorneys standing in front of this lack of Asian audience, talking about these unconscious bias, telling the lawyers when you hire, you can't discriminate, all of the good things that we know that we're supposed to do. Several of the older judges, unfortunately, they were judges, got up and said, why do we have to do any of this? This is ridiculous. And I always tell this story when I go on the road show with Will because it kind of breaks the ice. And I was kind of handing Will this Post-it that I felt a little uncomfortable that they were not used to having 3 Asian lawyers talking to them. And I could tell, okay? So I kind of put the Post-it in front of him that we did this a week before at 99 Park Avenue, Manhattan, didn't have a single problem. Everything we talked about, everyone's shaking their head yes and affirmation. That's great. We agree. And this, we're getting resistance all the way across the board. And I expected Will to be somewhat apologetic to calm them down because it looked like they were going to get enraged and we were going to run for the parking lot at that point. I give him a lot of credit. He stood in front of them and said, this is not a kumbaya moment. You people need the credit and you better learn it. If somebody walks in off the street to your law firm in Mineola and wants to be interviewed, you better take the interview. And then at that moment was interesting. All the women in the audience that were afraid to speak up started to speak up. So I totally understand this. And, you know, as lawyers, this is what we were taught, to be just and fair. And I constantly have to remind the law students this. They sometimes miss the point. And honestly, I have to say working remotely now isn't helping with people skills about learning about all this right now. But Meredith, thank you so much. Does anybody have anything to add to this right now, or war stories? There are some interesting war stories. I'll go back because I've been around a long time. I call myself a dinosaur. Right out of law school, right after clerking with Constance Baker Molly in the Southern District, you know, I decided I want to become a real estate, no, as an immigration attorney first. So I am interviewing with the sleaziest lawyers in New York. And I don't like to say that about my colleagues, but it was pretty bad, at a salary of $10,000 a year in 1983. And the things that they said to me, they shouldn't be interviewing me and asking me that I'm Asian. Are you married? Do you have children? None of these things should be addressed. I mean, it was appalling when you think about it. That hopefully doesn't happen today. Thank you so much, Meredith. We appreciated the short time you had to speak to us, but it's important as lawyers that we learn about this we have to be ethical. Donna is going to speak much, and I'm going to tell a funny story. As I was tooling the title for this, I sent an email to everybody, and I wasn't thinking it was what you call, this is very innocent, unconscious bias. I said, let's do a CLE on All Lives Matter. And thank goodness for Donna, Dozier Gordon, comes back to me an email, that's not appropriate, Margaret. It should be Black Lives Matter. And I totally agree. I understood that very moment, which was about a month ago. This is where we need to learn how to be appropriate. So I learned that quickly. And there are some of my colleagues, I sit on the Asian Columbia Alumni Association, and that's a mouthful, but it's any Asian alumni that went to Columbia University. I went to Barnard, and we are supporting George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. We had to issue a statement. All the boards I sit on, every not-for-profit, had to issue a statement in response to the social injustice. And our president decides, thank goodness she passed it for review by the board of directors. She puts out that our statement is going to be entitled Colored Lives Matter, at which point everybody on this board that sits in London, Hong Kong, immediately responded to the email. And I made a funny joke that the lawyers needed to review that. That can't go out to thousands of people, okay? We need to understand that, and it needs to be appropriate. And on that note, I'm going to introduce Donna Dozier Gordon to talk about the Black Lives Matters movement and what we need to do. And we've all kind of responded, and a little bit on allyship in the short amount of time that she has to speak. Donna, welcome to the panel.
In today's forum, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Donna, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We got you, thank you.
Yes, I don't know if you caught that, but AABANY, I just wanted to thank you for providing this forum today, and I'm very happy to be here. challenges that are being faced by law firms are not unlike the diversity challenges faced in my industry or in corporate America for that matter. So you're not alone. And I do have a build on the comments from Will and Asker on business case and whether it's right thing to do or business case. And I think there has to be an appropriate balance between the two. When I first started doing this work, companies were very focused on the right thing to do, but right thing to do in times of trouble, a lot of times companies think right thing to do is optional, things that they can opt out of with and still be successful. So I think there has to be a balance between doing the right thing, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive. You can do the right thing and do well in business at the same time, but we can't lose sight of the fact that this is an absolute business imperative, and it really is about the future relevance of the firm, because the landscape is changing in this country, and increasingly success is going to be dependent on a firm's ability to understand, connect with, and empower the growing diversity in our country. So I just wanted to add that to the comments that were shared previously. We are at this time really living through two pandemics. You know, the first is obviously COVID, and the second is the racial injustice and the racial violence that has once again reared its head, as Meredith said, very quickly on the heels of when we transitioned to work from home because of COVID. We witnessed the murder of George Floyd, and too often this racial violence and racial injustice is at the hands of police. And you know, to the point that was raised earlier, when I look at some of the images of recent weeks, they look like images from 1968 rather than 2020. And I think that that's really a shame. So my task today is to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement. And Black Lives Matter, just to ground us all, is a global organization that began in 2013 in the wake of the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who was the murderer of Trayvon Martin. I'm sure you all remember that case. The group protests against violence that's racially motivated, particularly against police brutality that's been waged against the African American community. The group is not a hate group, as some in the media have put forth and some conservatives have put forth. It really is about a positive affirmation of the humanity, the societal contributions, and quite frankly, the resilience of Black people in this country in the wake of oppression. Again, this movement has been around for 7 years, but really has been reignited in the wake of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. And one of the things that gives me a lot of hope in this moment versus previous moments is that the movement has garnered multi-generational and multicultural support. So one of the things that make it very important for us to talk about this today is that Black Lives Matter and the racial injustice and unrest that the country has been facing has really reignited the interest also in corporate D&I efforts. And I'm sure that's very much the same in the law profession. But what I have observed is a lot of statements around how Black Lives Matter and how our company values Black lives, but without receipts, as we say, all of those statements really ring very hollow. And in fact, you know, despite the long history of D&I efforts have been in place for at least 30 years. I would say since the 90s, they've probably been fairly mainstream. And yet African Americans, in terms of the advancement that they've experienced in the corporate world, is relatively flat in terms of representation. And in fact, African Americans are largely missing from senior leadership roles. I'm sure that you all can attest to that in your firms. They're missing from board participation. They are missing from business partner relationships when you talk about supplier diversity. And so, you know, one of the things that you need to think about as you consider this moment is to make it real. And I think that It's an opportunity for sure to relook at the commitment to D&I, but any initiative that's embarked upon must be tied to broader strategies that the firm has for growth and, you know, kind of its business focus for the next 3 to 5 years. It's not a moment in time. To the point that was raised at the top of this meeting about allyship, I think allyship starts with empathy. Really kind of seeking to understand the experience of those that are unlike your own. And check on your African American team members. You know, given the history of African Americans in this country, this is a time of great trauma for African Americans. And I'm sure that associates and employees in your firm are feeling this. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger at the fact that in 2020, we're still confronted with these issues, you know, given the history of slavery in this country, given the history of Jim Crow, given the history of the civil rights movement. 50 years fast forward to 2020, and we're still dealing with these issues. So people are really kind of struggling with, why is this still happening? I think having tough conversations about race and racism, which is unusual in the workplace, I think is very important. Meredith talked about authenticity, and I think that's one of the main hallmarks of any D&I initiative. Employees should feel that they can have a sense of belonging and be their authentic selves when they walk in your door. And because if they don't, then you're not getting the best performance. If people always have to feel like I have to present myself a certain way to be successful here, if they're thinking about, if I say this, how will this be perceived? Even down to, if I wear my hair naturally, how will that be perceived? You want people to focus on the contributions that they can make in your organization and focus on the value that they can bring, not those things. And I think having candid conversations about race and racism and the origins of racism is also an important part of building greater allyship. I think that in terms of action steps that can be taken along with kind of this general thought about building allyship, and I think allyship is important for any marginalized group in the workforce. Focus on addressing the gaps in your African American talent pipeline. One of the things that you often hear in this work is that we would like to hire diverse folks, but we can't find any quality people. And I would submit to you that you're not looking in the right place if that's the answer that you're getting. Typically what happens is that people are generally well-meaning, but we all tend to gravitate towards the people that are most like ourselves. So our networks reflect the same thing. So if you're tapping into your network to look for talent and that network isn't terribly diverse, well, you know, obviously you're not going to get diversity. So you have to be very proactive and intentional about casting a wider net. And if that means developing some strategic partners with African American organizations, I know that there's the Organization of African American Women Council. There are, you know, HBCUs that have law schools, for example. There are many ways that you can broaden that net, and that's required if you want to get past the idea that you can't find qualified, diverse talent out there. And then finally, what I would say, and this is something that I said at the top of my comments, one of the things that's very concerning to me personally is, you know, while all this D&I activity is somewhat gratifying, I wonder where these companies will be 2 months from now, or 6 months from now, or next year. And I submit to you that far too many companies probably see this as something that they need to do to address the current moment. But these efforts should not be a moment in time. And if you're going to embark on a diversity journey, it is about a sustainable commitment. It's almost better not to do anything if you embark on a commitment and then pull back, you know, when the climate in the country has moved on to other issues. So that's what I wanted to share with you all at this point.
Donna, I couldn't agree more with you, because the issue with the two things, and it's interesting that you raised that Sean and I have been discussing the last couple of weeks, the talent pool of where you're going, and I'm not attacking the Ivy League. You and I are Ivy Leaguers, but you know, a lot of companies, they're still, you know, we're working now. I'm on the Queens Chamber of Commerce with Baruch, with Queens College. There's talent in other places that need to be reached out to. A lot of the first generational their families never went to college, and they're very eager to get involved. So, you know, companies need to see that. All right, they need to understand the talent pool. And then the issue you talk about, and I have a lot of friends that are diversity officers, and they're worried because when COVID hit and the law firms are pulling back, is that the first job out? I saw it in after Bear Stearns, the major title underwriters, and I was only a consultant on their national diversity teams because I'm in the legal department. The first place to go for the big banks after JP Morgan, after the 2009 debacle of Bear Stearns, with the diversity directors, and then they felt, get rid of all the diversity directors, and we worked side by side, Hispanic, Afro-American, and Asian, all those diversity people out the door in these real estate corporations and banks, and let the marketing director handle it. Again, I mean, the marketing director has no clue of multicultural, the facets of D&I, and you know, that's a big concern now, because I say that, is this just a trend? And you don't want to say this is a trend. This is our moment. This is our time to get this done, and we have to kind of speak up now. So allyship, it's interesting because some of my Asian groups, you know, it's not characteristic of all of us to go out there, protest, and make a lot of noise. And I've been the noisy lawyer, at least on the boards like the Bar Association. There's other lawyers that'll back me up. The non-lawyers ones, I've encouraged them that everybody needs to do this now. We can't just sit back and not make a statement on Black Lives Matter. It is pivotal to everybody now. And they've kind of listened to me, and I said, I know it's not your nature. I'm Chinese, so it's not as bad. If you're Japanese, you just don't even say anything. And that's no offense to my Japanese colleagues. There are subcultural differences and nuances within the Asian segment, all right? It's just not our nature to go out and rally and make a lot of noise, but I've encouraged that we have to do this. And if it's our gentle way, we have to do it. One of the comments in the chat room applauded what I said in the beginning, that the quiet Asians need to speak up now. And it's from Michael Ling, and I want to applaud him that he agreed with everything I said in the beginning. And for me, it's taken decades for me to speak up. I admit that when I was in law school, and Meredith would agree, she's a professor, 1/3 of your point when you got to the 1L in law school, if you didn't speak up, you know, 1/3 of your point was deducted. So you had to speak up and say something all of a sudden. But does anybody else have anything to add to this important topic?
I would just add the role of bar associations and law schools, because you mentioned law schools, and AABANY's hosting this. We're both, Margaret and I, active with the network of bar leaders. We believe in bar associations. I think we're well positioned to build this pipeline and mentor those in our community to take on these leadership roles, which is important, right? Because I think it was Donna, it might have been Donna who said, you know, sometimes you hear there just aren't the people there to hire, or it might have been Asker who said that. Well, we need to really mentor our young members and our law students to put them on that path.
And
Yeah.
I've kind of go ahead, Asker.
Yeah, I just want to add just two really quick things, you know, on the Black Lives Matter. And obviously, this is the Asian American Bar Association that we're putting this program on. And there's necessarily a nexus between the Black Lives Matter movement and, you know, the Asian experience in the United States. And Donna, thank you very much for your comments. And I would just add kind of just two things. Number one, as Asians, anything and everything that we've achieved in this country, and however long it's taken to do that, is because of what the Black community suffered through and fought for and advocated for years before we even got here. And so if we think that we've done this all on our own and we're all successful because we're us, part of it is that, clearly, but part of it is because of the struggles of the Black community in the United States. And I would say the second thing, and maybe it's the same, it's just the other side of that coin, you know, there's some horrendous things happening to Asians, particularly in light of the COVID-19 and the harassment and the violence and all that type of stuff. But we also, I think, as a community have to understand that that's only happening because we've allowed the same types of things to happen to the Black community for the last 400 years. And so it's a natural extension of what this country does to marginalized groups. And we have to, I think, and again, we could talk about this for hours, but I think as an Asian community, we have to understand the connection between the two. We have to understand our role and responsibility to be allies. And I think we also have to understand the role that we play as advocates within our own communities to educate people on, you know, the issues that are going on and our own biases and racist attitudes that we all hear around the kitchen table about the Black community, at least within the South Asian community, we hear a lot of it, but the role that we have to play and the responsibilities that we have to make the world a better place.
Asker, so well said. Thank you so very much. And Donna, thank you for starting this wonderful conversation. Meredith, I can't agree with you more because I'm involved in a lot of bar associations, and being involved in so many bar associations outside of the Asian bars really opened up my eyes to understanding and making some amazing lifelong friends and starting the journey on what we have to do. Last but not least is Sean Bacchus. We didn't forget about you, Sean. I know it's been dominated by lawyers right now, but we're looking for your perspective from your corporate background on the role of corporate America in DEI and what we need to do, and why did you form EDIC right now? Is the timing right for you? And I'll say, in a funny thing with what I learned from Sean, we don't call it diversity, inclusion, and equity because the word, the mnemonic comes up as die. That's terrible. And I'm Chinese. That's bad feng shui. You don't want to say die, okay? So we kind of, within EDIC, we turned it around to equity, diversity, EDI. And that's what we used for that one. So Sean, join the panel. We lose Sean? Let's see what happened. Okay, Sean, here we go.
I can't hear Sean.
Okay, are we good now? Can't hear Sean.
I can see him talking.
We can see you, Sean. Do you have volume? Oh my. Okay. Let's see what we can do.
Maybe that's why he's been so quiet.
Oh, he's not, he's muted. He's got to unmute. Sean, unmute.
I did. Can you
There
hear
you go. You're good now.
Okay,
Thank you. Okay, here you go.
Press the button.
You're back. Thank you.
Hey, Asker, I great points there. You know, I think what we need to continue to do is have these dialogues within our cooperation, our law rooms. It's just got to be consistent for us to see any progress made. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Margaret and AABANY for giving me the opportunity to be here on the panel. Margaret asked that I share a little bit about you know, my experience in diversity and inclusion, but also being a former banker, how's this affected me, and how this something that I pivot from banking to diversity and inclusion. And I just want to say that being in 24 years of banking, I've worked at 3 large corporations, and Citigroup, at JP Morgan, and previously at HSBC. And I've been getting lessons through that time as to, and being built upon diversity, inclusion, and equity for all employees. I want to share a quick story with you guys. I remember being in a position to be promoted to a manager role in one of the companies, and I was told that I was doing a great job where I was, and my customers would want to see me where I am, and they had someone else in mind. So they brought in this gentleman, young guy, just graduated from college, and of course a Caucasian gentleman, and did not have any banking experience, and gave him the position that I wanted. And I must say that I was upset and not too happy about it, so I left and went to another corporation. Another issue happened where I was on the bench to be promoted to a leadership role, a much higher leadership role, where I would lead the country in banking. And I was told by my boss that I was not going to get that position because they were looking for a woman for that position. And so again, bringing all of this back, why I felt it was important for equity, diversity, and inclusion for all. So I started EDIC in August of 2019, and our focus was on 3 pillars. The first was education. We found that there was a lot of leaders in the organizations or corporations that I've been did not have the experience around unconscious bias or biases in general, and did not have the experience in leadership. And a lot of it was because they were lacking the education on how to engage a diverse team, but also how to look to build a diverse team. And I decided that we need to start with executive learning and teaching of these leaders so that they are able to add value to their corporations, and not only that, to the employees within the corporations. The second piece was data analysis, and it's a huge piece. Today, there are a lot of CDOs, chief diversity officers, are struggling to do their jobs because they don't have the necessary data to help them with diversity and inclusion within their company. And so we wanted to provide data and analysis to these organizations so that they can see with the behaviors that they need to apply to their organization to change culture, they needed to have the data and analysis as well to show their progress in their ED&I. And so we thought that was an extremely important pillar. The last was accountability, which we call recognition. And so recognizing organizations for the progress that they're making and support that we're giving them through data and education, and helping them in leading their specific organizations within the industry, in their industry, and how to move diversity and inclusion. And also recognizing them, but also holding them accountable that the work that they're not doing, that they need to continue to do, but showing them the path to a diverse team, diverse company, and a better culture for their employees. So that's the reason why I wanted to bring EDIC aboard. The other thing, and Margaret and I talk a lot, is mentorship and sponsorship. We've got an opportunity where a lot of folks are, through nepotism, are promoted or put into different positions because they know someone within their organization, right? But there's not a lot of mentorship from senior leaders or executives and sponsorship to help minorities or folks with abilities to, or folks with that have gender or gender differences. So we wanted to move those folks. We wanted to give those executives the opportunity to mentor these people so that they can move on and be successful. And so we came up with that. And I just wanted to read a couple things for you guys. According to Russell Meadows Associates, they're finding 7% of companies are seeing a decline in capitalization because they're seeing discrimination and allegations of and employee disapprovals. And so because of that, you're seeing a decline in capitalization. A 2018 study, a McKinsey study, fostering diversity and inclusion is very important and it's becoming tangible. Organizations with diverse boards and executives, important, right? You cannot have a CDO trying to really do their job and accomplish this well without a board that is diverse or a CEO that really is committed to diversity and inclusion. 35% of those companies are likely to perform better than companies that are not proactive in bringing diversity and inclusion to their corporations. CDOs are not enough. We're finding that CDOs are not given the opportunities or the resources to perform their jobs. The other thing we're seeing is that D&I initiatives are not aligned with the business priorities. So you're seeing companies, they're saying, yes, we want diversity and inclusion, we embrace diversity and inclusion, but it doesn't align with when it comes to return on investment. They're thinking that it's not aligning with their priorities. Lack of organizational support. So you're not getting the executive leaders supporting these CDOs, right? So without CEO executive leaders supporting D&I initiatives, tends to decline, and it becomes a check the box as opposed to really doing the work. And that's what EDIC is about. It's about really doing the work around diversity and inclusion. A lot of CDOs are new to role, so you're seeing that CDOs really don't understand equity, diversity, and inclusion, and they're learning it on the fly. They're learning it in the job. The other thing is they don't have the power to make changes within their organization. And so because they don't have the power, again, it's also being put on the side. And then they, again, as I mentioned earlier, they don't have the data and analysis to help them to do their job. So a lot of opportunities there. D&I has become last on the business priorities. So we've got to make sure that we continue through conversations, as I mentioned to Asker, is to make sure that we're continuing through conversations to keep it top of mind. Asker had mentioned it needs to be its own budget, similar to your financial advisor or similar to your HR executive. It needs to be that important, right? And so one of the other things we wanted to look at from D&I, and we talked a little bit earlier, is recruiting and retention. And so I found in my walk in the executive roles that I had in these institutions, that we were looking to these colleges that were either Yale or Harvard, colleges that really didn't look at students within our CUNY system. We've got some students that are doing fantastic work at John Jay College of Law, which they're doing some fantastic work there. And there's a lot of potential there to hire some of the best students there. And so a lot of work to be done there. We're looking again to focus on the education piece, where we're going to bring on executives to learn their blind spots around biases, and to learn how to really develop a team and see the ROI, the success that can come from having a diverse, inclusive team. So, Margaret, again, thank you for having me, giving me the opportunity to speak today, and looking forward to many more.
Thank you, Sean. I'm excited to be on board with you. We're going to do a lot of good things. We're at the end where I actually have some questions. I laughed because Asker said I might have to throw softballs at the panel if nobody asks questions, and I'm a tennis and golfer. You don't want me throwing golf balls at you. That could hurt. Ouch. And I was going to throw tennis balls at you, but I have some questions. Barry Kazan, who's a colleague and a good friend, if you know him, Asker, he has a question for you. Most of us aren't going to get the best because of the size of our firms or because of the competition for diverse attorneys. How would you fit your model and advice that we know diverse teams are better than the non-diverse teams? What are they going to look for? How would they know to do this?
So I'm not sure I necessarily understand.
I'm trying to understand it as well.
Let
me see if Barry's here. Barry's here. He's he could. I don't know if he can unmute himself.
No,
I don't think he can. All right, never mind that. Okay.
Actually, I think I can. Asker, during your presentation, you talked about the advice that you give firms that, if you're going to hire the best team, don't assume that the best team is, a white male team or what have you. But many of us who, try to recruit diverse lawyers face a competition bar that we can't offer enough money, or we're not that diverse. And so you're basically asking somebody to step in first. But my question really went to more the idea of this, the research proving that a diverse team tends to make better decisions, tends to produce better work product. And so, I didn't hear that in your suggestion, and just was wondering how that might fit in with the advice that you give.
Yeah, so I guess, so I would start from the premise that the best people coming out of law school, however you want to define that, and personally, I think the best people are a diverse group of people, but the best people are not all going, or maybe say it this way, the people that go to large law firms, right, aren't necessarily the best people coming out of law school. And so if the question is actually, how does a firm of 15 lawyers compete with a Shearman and Sterling when it comes to recruiting? The answer to that question is you don't, because if your concept of the best people is whoever is in the top 10% of the class at Harvard Law School, and Shearman and Sterling is paying those people $195,000 as soon as they come out with a $195,000 bonus, and your pay scale is like in the 105, whatever that number is, yeah, you're not going to be able to compete with that. And I think what a lot of firms that are not on the Shearman level, I think they tend to use that as a crutch. And they say, oh, well, how are we supposed to get the top 10% at Harvard? Because they all want to go work in New York, or they all want to go work at the Shearmans and all that type of stuff. So maybe the solution is, and I'm just throwing this out there, is don't try to go get the top 10% at Harvard, right? Maybe look at the top 10 to 20%, or look at the top 20 to 30%. I mean, number one, are we actually going to believe that someone who went to Harvard Law School but only graduated in the top 40% is not capable of practicing law? I mean, come on, right? So, I mean, at some level, I think we have to kind of adjust our expectations based on who we are, what we are, and what we realistically have access to. I used to hear, I'm in Hartford, Connecticut, and I used to hear it all the time from Hartford firms. Well, nobody wants to come to Hartford. Well, really? Does nobody want to come to Hartford? Or is just the people that you're trying to get to come to Hartford not interested in coming to Hartford? And so number one, my question is, what are you doing to try to get those people? And number two, maybe you should look at some other different types of people, right? Instead of looking at the 25-year-old who just graduated from Harvard and is looking to party it up, maybe you look at the 35-year-old that just graduated from Harvard and is married and has children and is looking to kind of settle into somewhere where they can raise a family. So, you know, like that type of thing. So I guess my answer to the question, Barry, isn't so much, you know, how does a smaller, non kind of high name brand firm compete for the same talent? But I think the question you guys have to ask is, what every organization has to ask themselves is, what does it actually take to succeed at this organization? And if nobody at your law firm has ever made partner who didn't go to Harvard Law School, then yeah, you maybe have a challenge. But, you know, I've seen studies that show, you know, as an example, they go to the partnership and they say, what are the 5 key characteristics that a person needs to have in order to be successful at this law firm? And then they take those 5 characteristics and they lay them on top of the actual partnership at that law firm. And there's almost no correlation between the two. And so, you know, my thing about the best is trying to figure out who the best people are for your organization and figuring out who has the best chance of success, who has the best ability to work with other people, you know, to your point, to become part of that diverse team, rather than I think what the legal profession has historically and traditionally defined as the best, which necessarily means where you went to school and the grades that you got.
If I might add,
Sure, Donna, go ahead.
kind of a build on what Asker is saying, this is one of the ways that diversity is kind of kept out of organizations. And it's this whole notion of preferences versus what's actually required to do a job. And sometimes if you deconstruct the job description, some of the things that you're asking for are not necessary for success. But it's tradition that, to the point or the example he raised, that everybody goes to a certain school, so therefore we must only recruit from the school. Sometimes you really have to look at what it is you're trying to achieve. And then in the example that I raised about looking at some of the historically Black law schools, for that matter, the Howards of the world, there are students there that are more than qualified to practice law, but because they haven't gone to an Ivy League school, sometimes are kind of written off. And I think, you know, in order to make progress, I think the point that Asker was raising is you have to change your thinking about these things.
I feel so bad.
I think she's frozen.
I feel bad for Donna. I'm going to
Yeah.
go on one last
Okay,
question.
quickly, that was a
Go
great
ahead,
point.
Sean.
I just wanted to add, in addition, I think that one of the things that we should be looking at when we're looking to recruit or to have a type of job description is to really be honest and transparent about the biases that we have in that job description or in the people that we're looking for. Present the biases, we'll talk about it as a group or a team, and then make sure that when we go out there to recruit or hire or to interview these folks, that we are aware of the biases that, that may come into play. And I think that can lead to hiring a better diverse team.
I have a very interesting comment from my colleague, Diane Clark. Diane Clark sits on the Diversity Inclusion Committee with me in the Nassau County Bar, and she's saying, and I know she's a public defender, that there's a lot of implicit bias and lack of diversity inclusion, although not intended, she's saying, within the public defender's office. And that's kind of sad because the nature of the client base that, you know, that you're representing. She said the reality is the salary for a public defender is low. Diversity issue needs to be addressed. I had a quick question, and I'm going to open it to the entire panel. It was originally issued to Will, and I'm trying to answer from Christopher Lee. What do you recommend to rock things up at a firm? What can you do to go counter to the firm philosophy? And I guess that's within the complex of the lack of DEI, I guess, to make a statement. He says, how do we bite the hand that feeds us? Do we really want to bite the hand that feeds us? I mean, with the younger colleagues that I mentor, when they come and they complain to me, I said, not quite sure you want the partners or the general counsel to see that you're upset right now. We do not want to disrupt your position at the company right now. So discretion is sometimes important. Sometimes I'm the counsel that takes everybody out to lunch all the time to get them out of the office to see what they have to say. It's an interesting.
I think we just lost Margaret. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Margaret froze. Will, maybe you can.
Sure. I guess what I would say is, certainly a large law firm that is, or any large organization, that's a concern. But I think there's a lot of advocates and a lot of, allies that have influence at the organization that you can sort of go to as sort of maybe a safe spot to share and express your concerns. And I think those are the people that you need to sort of target. And I think that will help effectuate change. We're certainly not saying send a firm-wide email about your complaints or even office-wide, but I do believe there are advocates and people who are willing to go to bat for diverse attorneys, diverse applicants. So that's how I see it practically at a law firm, the best way to effectuate sort of change and to address a concern that's raised by maybe a diverse attorney.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely, Will. One thing I often find myself saying to people is, particularly at the large law firm environment, the truth of the matter is there's probably more straight white men who care about diversity and inclusion at your organization than there are women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. And that's partly a very sad statement about the state of large law firms. But it also hopefully reminds us that, there's a lot of people that care about diversity and inclusion. And it's just, the truth is, most people just don't know how to get involved. And so to Will's point, obviously you have to figure out who those people are and they can use them, but every single firm has them. And you just got to figure out who they are. And if you're concerned, then, you go talk to that person, and maybe that person has a stronger voice at the moment. And then the only thing I would add, in the large law firm environment, the best thing to do to not ever have that fear is have the largest book of business at the entire firm, and you can say anything you want about anything.
Including the other side of this, though, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I don't
think that's where that word accompliceship comes into play, right? It's moved from allyship to accompliceship. When you have someone that's willing to go against the laws or rules or policies of an organization to defend your perspective on what's happening and what's wrong. It's something where we need to really get more education on how to do that the right way.
I apologize. I lost internet. I can't believe it. So I panic mode. I want to thank everybody. This was an enormous panel, and it's so good. I always say that we need to do part 2. I want to thank Will Ling, Oscar Saeed, Donna Gordon, Sean Bacchus, and Meredith Miller. I think we're a great panel. I did, as per Oscar's request, when I invite him, I always make sure it's balanced and we have a good representation. And anybody that has any questions, just contact me. It's mtling88@gmail.com. If you need contact information, please go into the handouts. Lots of good information. and look forward to your comments. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great day, and
Yeah, everyone.
let's keep up the
Thank you.
fight, okay? Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.